Good evening to the members of our make-believe monastery. In other words, those subscribed and or commenting. And to those just dropping in, welcome to our daily devotional reading. We are reading Plato in 1 year, the Undisputed Dialogues of Plato. And we're currently in Phaedo, so quite in the beginning. Before we begin, let's take a moment just to sink into the here and now, to calm our minds and our hearts, so that we can be open and receptive to the words of Plato. Very good, Socrates, said Simmias. Then I will tell you my difficulty, and Cebes will tell you his. I feel myself, and I dare say that you have the same feeling, how hard, or rather impossible, is the attainment of any certainty about questions such as these in the present life. And yet I should deem him a coward who do not prove what is said about them to be the uttermost, or whose heart failed him before he had examined them on every side. For he should persevere until he has achieved one of two things. Either he should discover or be taught the truth about them, or, if this is impossible, I would have him take the best and most irrefragable of human theories, and let this be the raft upon which he sails through life. Not without risk, as I admit, if he cannot find some word of God which will more surely and safely carry him. And now, as you bid me, I will venture to question you, and then I shall not have to reproach myself hereafter with not having said at the time what I think. For when I consider the matter, either alone or with Cebes, the argument does certainly appear to me, Socrates, to be not sufficient. Socrates answered, I dare say, my friend, that you may be right, but I should like to know in what respect the argument is insufficient. In this respect, replied Simmias. Suppose a person to use the same argument about harmony and the lyre, I think. It's the music instrument I can't pronounce. I'm just going to say guitar going forward, because they have strings. Might he not say that harmony is a thing invisible, incorporeal, perfect, divine, existing in the guitar which is harmonized, but that the guitar and the strings are matter and material, composite, earthly, and akin to mortality? And when someone breaks the guitar or cuts and rends the strings, and he who takes this view would argue as you do, and on the same analogy, that the harmony survives and has not perished, you cannot imagine, he would say, that the guitar without the strings and the broken strings themselves, which are mortal, remain, and yet that the harmony, which is of heavenly and immortal nature and kindred, has perished before the mortal. The harmony must still be somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay before anything can happen to that. The thought, Socrates, must have occurred to your own mind that such is our conception of the soul. And what and that when the body is in a manner strung and held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, then the soul is the harmony or due proportionate admixture of them. But if so, whenever the strings of the body are unduly loosened or overstrained through disease or other injury, then the soul, though most divine, like other harmonies of music and work of art, of course perishes at once. Although the material remains of the body may last for a considerable time until they are either decayed or burnt. And if anyone maintains that the soul, being the harmony of the elements of the body, is first to perish in that which is called death, how shall we answer him? Socrates looked fixedly at us, as is his manner, and said with a smile, Simmias has reason on his side. And why does not some one of you who is better able than myself answer him? For there is force in his attack upon me. But perhaps before we answer him, we had better also hear what Sebes has to say, that we might gain time for reflection. And when they have both spoken, we may either assent to them, if there is truth in what they say, or if not, we will maintain our position. Please to tell me then, Sebes, he said, what was the difficulty which troubled you? Sebes said, I will tell you. My feeling is that the argument is where it was, and open to the same objections which were urged before. For I am ready to admit that the existence of the soul before entering into the bodily form has been very ingeniously and, if I may say so, quite sufficiently proven. But the existence of the soul after death is still, in my judgment, unproven. Now my objection is not the same as that of Simmias, for I am not disposed to deny that the soul is stronger and more lasting than the body, being of opinion that in all such respects the soul very far excels the body. Well, then, says the argument to me, why do you remain unconvinced? When you see that the weaker continues in existence after the man is dead, will you not admit that the more lasting must also survive during the same period of time? Now I will ask you to consider whether the objection, which, like Simmias, I will express in a figure, is of any weight. The analogy which I will adduce is that of an old weaver who dies, and after his death someone says, he is not dead, he must be alive. See, there is the coat which he himself wove and wore, and which remains whole and undecayed. And then he proceeds to ask of someone who is incredulous, whether a man lasts longer or the coat which is in use, and where. And when he is answered that a man lasts longer, think that he has thus certainly demonstrated the survival of the man, who is the more lasting, because the less lasting remains. But that, Simmias, as I would beg you to remark, is a mistake. Anyone can see that he who talks thus is talking nonsense. For the truth is that the weaver aforesaid, having woven and worn many such coats, outlived several of them, and was outlived by the last. But a man is not therefore proved to be slighter and weaker than a coat. Now the relation of the body to the soul may be expressed in a similar figure, and any one may very fairly say in like manner that the soul is lasting and the body weak and short-lived in comparison. He may argue in like manner that every soul wears out many bodies, especially if a man live many years. While he is alive, the body delinquesces and decays, and the soul always weaves another garment and repairs the waste. But of course, whenever the soul perishes, she must have on her last garment, and this will survive her. And when at length, when the soul is dead, the body will show its native weakness and quickly decompose and pass away. I would therefore rather not rely on the argument from superior strength to prove the continued existence of the soul after death. For granting even more than you affirm to be possible, and acknowledging not only that the soul existed before birth, but also that the souls of some exist and will continue to exist after death, and will be born and die again and again, and that there is a natural strength in the soul which will hold out and be born many times, nevertheless, we may be still inclined to think that she will weary in the labors of successive births, and may at last succumb in one of the deaths, and utterly perish. And this death and dissolution of the body, which brings destruction to the soul, may be unknown to any of us, for no one of us can have had any experience of it. And if so, then I maintain that he who is confident about death has but a foolish confidence, unless he is able to prove that the soul is altogether immortal and imperishable. But if he cannot prove the soul's immortality, he who is about to die will always have reason to fear that when the body is disunited, the soul also may utterly perish. All of us, as we afterward remarked to one another, had an unpleasant feeling at hearing what they said. When we had been so firmly convinced before, now to have our faith shaken seemed to introduce a confusion and uncertainty, not only into the previous argument, but into any future one. Either we were incapable of forming a judgment, or there were no grounds of belief. Now we have the other speaker. Just a quick reminder, Phaedo is the narrator of the story. He tells to Echecrates what happened the day that Socrates died. And now this Echecrates, which we agreed we will call E because I'm saying it with my own accent, he interrupts the narration, and he says, "There I feel with you, by heaven I do, Phaedo. And when you were speaking, I was beginning to ask myself the same question. What argument can I ever trust again? For what could be more convincing than the argument of Socrates, which has now fallen into discredit? That the soul is a harmony is a doctrine which has always had a wonderful attraction for me, and when mentioned came back to me at once, as my own original conviction. And now I must begin again and find another argument which will assure me that when the man is dead, the soul survives. Tell me, I implore you, how did Socrates proceed? Did he appear to share the unpleasant feeling which you mention, or did he calmly meet the attack? And did he answer forcibly or feebly? Narrate what passed as exactly as you can." Often, I have wondered at Socrates, but never more than on that occasion. That he should be able to answer was nothing. But what astonished me was, first, the gentle and pleasant and approving manner in which he received the words of the young men, and then his quick sense of the wound which he had been inflicted by their argument, and the readiness with which he healed it. He might be compared to a general rallying his defeated and broken army, urging them to accompany him and return to the field of argument. What followed? He asked Phaedo. You shall hear, for I was close to him on his right hand, seated on a sort of stool, and he on a couch which was a good deal higher. He stroked my head and pressed the hair upon my neck. He had a way of playing with my hair. And then he said, Tomorrow, Phaedo, I suppose that these fair locks of yours will be severed. Yes, Socrates, I suppose that they will, I replied. Not so, if you will take my advice. What shall I do with them, then? I asked. Today, he replied, and not tomorrow. If this argument dies and we cannot bring it to life again, you and I will both shave our locks. And if I were you and the argument got away from me, and I could not hold my ground against Simmias and Cebes, I would myself take an oath, like the Argives, not to wear hair any more until I had renewed the conflict and defeated them. Yes, I said, but Heracles himself is said not to be a match for two. Summon me then, he said, and I will be your louse until the sun goes down. I summon you rather, I rejoined, not as Heracles summoning Iolaus, but as Iolaus might summon Heracles. I thought Hercules, but it's definitely spelled Heracles. That will do as well, he said, but first let us take care that we avoid a danger. Of what nature? I said. Lest we become misologists, he replied. No worse thing can happen to a man than this. For as there are misanthropists or haters of men, there are also misologists or haters of ideas. The logos being the idea. And both spring from the same cause, which is ignorance of the world. Misanthropy arises out of the too great confidence in inexperience. You trust a man and think him altogether true and sound and faithful, and then in a little while he turns out to be false and knavish, and then another, and when this has happened several times to a man, especially when it happens among those whom he deems to be his own most trusted and familiar friends, and he has often quarrelled with them. He at last hates all men and believes that no one has any good in him at all. You must have observed this trait of character. I have. And is not the feeling discreditable? Is it not obvious that such an one, having to deal with other men, was clearly without any experience of human nature? For experience would have taught him the true state of the case, that few are the good and few the evil, and that the great majority are in the interval between them. What do you mean? I said. I mean, he replied, as you might say of the very large and the very small, that nothing is more uncommon than a very large or very small man, and this applies generally to all extremes, whether of great and small, swift and slow, fair and foul, black and white, and whether the instances you select be men or dogs or anything else, few are the extremes, but many are in the mean between them. Did you never observe this? Yes, I said, I have. And do you not imagine, he said, that if there were a competition in evil, the worst would be found to be very few? Yes, that is very likely, I said. Yes, that is very likely, he replied, although in this respect arguments are unlike men. There I was led on by you to say more than I had intended, but the point of comparison was that when a simple man who has no skill in dialectics believes an argument to be true, which he afterwards imagines to be false, whether really false or not, and then another and another, he has no longer any faith left. And great disputers, as you know, come to think at last that they have grown to be the wisest of mankind, for they alone perceive the utter unsoundness and instability of all arguments, or indeed of all things, which, like the currents in the Euripus, are going up and down in never-ceasing ebb and flow. That is quite true, I said. Yes, Phaedo, he replied. And how melancholy, if there be such a thing as truth or certainty or possibility of knowledge, that a man should have lighted upon some argument or other, which at first seemed true and then turned out to be false. And instead of blaming himself and his own want of wit, because he is annoyed, should at last be too glad to transfer his blame from himself to arguments in general, and for ever afterwards should hate and revile them, and lose truth and the knowledge of realities. Yes, indeed, I said, that is very melancholy. Thus far our scripture for the evening. I love Socrates' display of the love of the search for truth that is portrayed by Plato in this passage. What struck me at a certain point when, was it Timaeus or Cebes, I can't remember, said that I'm going to ask you the question because I don't afterwards want to think like, I should have asked. Was the honor of having had Socrates as a companion and interlocutor. And I wonder how many times we miss the fact that we're also experiencing a great honor. The raft upon which he sails through life, I wrote down. I like metaphorical language. When I blocked off the passage that we are reading tonight, because I allocated the text according to a physical copy of the collected works of Plato that I have, but I'm using and reading the free online version. I changed the link tonight because I noticed that the link that I previously shared just stops in the middle of Phaedo. So there's another one, also free, also readily available online. And And that doesn't have the numbers of the text, so I have to actually read through it and make sure that I read the correct. And when I did that, this book came to mind. I cannot remember how and where in the book I read about it, but I do know that Chris, it might have been Chris and John together, wrote a passage on misologist, and how, and I think they were inspired or aided by Dishi Schindler David's book. I read this book twice already, and I feel like I have to read it again. It's a really good book. The first time I read it, I felt such a longing For instance, here he says, theology is not merely an abstract intellectual exercise. It is a following of God. And then I was thinking philosophy, it's not just a merely abstract exercise, it is a following of Sophia. And he quotes the whole faith-seeking understanding. And I'm just randomly opening the pages. Beautiful book. I read it and I thought like, oh, I should read it in Advent. And then the next year, during Advent, I read it with four or five of my friends online. It's really a good book. What jumped out at me when I think E was talking about how devastated he was and like, oh man, there goes my faith in the argument. Now I'll have to find another argument to support my faith in the existence of the soul after death. I was thinking, that's exactly not what you should do. I think a real love of reason is allowing the argument to take you where it is taking you. And if a better argument comes along, then goes along with that. Not searching for arguments that support your beliefs, but being open to being corrected. And that is, I think, one of the things, the first time I saw, the first time I really saw Alex O'Connor was just when he was quoting poetry by heart, and I was deeply impressed by that. But also the things he said seemed very deep and meaningful. Deep and, I'm using that word. Deep and well thought through. And then I started watching him, and I noticed that he is someone who follows the argument where it leads, and he's not open. He's not afraid. He seems to not be afraid. Maybe it's just because he's young. The book on wisdom actually says like people often reaches their peak wisdom level at 24, because then you're still open, you're still learning. After that, you have to actively cultivate wisdom if you want to keep it even. And funny that it's the same time as your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And I do believe then all the people who have actively kept the 24-year-old alive in themselves could be wiser than 24-year-olds. At least that's my hope. Although Joe seems to be refuting that hope. At least when it comes to me. But I respect that. I respect that deeply. Someone capable of going along with the argument. So not acquiring a mistrust in arguments but questioning, being open to questioning your own beliefs. I did what I think maybe what I lost when I lost my faith was the ability to commit to any point of view. It makes it easier to go along with the argument, but I'm not sure that there's any courage in that. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that. But it's already 30 minutes, I see. So I'm going to thank you for playing along. And I hope that our make-believe monastery might become a real asset in our love of learning, in our love of reason, and in search of the truth. May the spirit of Sophia be with you.